I flew back to Liberia within a week. I was there, testified again, was a complainant in the case against him, stood in front of him and said, then we had to, Ebola was in town. So we had to first we had to make sure those girls that were testifying were safe and they had a safe place to be, because there would be retaliation from the community against them. It was a very bold, brave thing of them to come forward. And then we had to get all of our, President's relief said all international staff that are not directly helping with Ebola relief need to leave the country. So we had to figure out how to get we had to get everybody out, all of our international staff, which we had a lot that first year, out of the country. And there was no goodbye. And these people had spent a year serving, in Liberia, and they were just left kind of quick in this, Ebola thing.
Working overtime, serve beer at a Bushwick dive, just trying to stay alive, but it's so damn hard. But I will not worry, though life ain't going as I planned. I heard it be hard, but it's so much harder. Well, I keep doing the best I can.
Welcome in and welcome to Under the Apron, the podcast that is usually here to expose the underbelly of the service industry. But today we have a very special, very unique episode. I am extremely excited to be able to have our guest on today. It is a bucket list of mine that's been going for about 10 years to be able to tell her story, help her, tell her story to more people in the world, because I think it's a very inspiring, important story to tell. It's also my 38th birthday, so this is my birthday present to be able to have this wonderful interview with my guest and a friend who I haven't talked to in a very long time as well. So it's nice to just be able to see her and catch up with her. So today we are going to have Katie Meyler. Hi, Katie.
Hey, Laurent.
Hi. Katie and I were just talking, off right before recording. And it's just, I honestly, sincerely, I get so joyful when I see you and talk to you. I love you. And I'm so happy that you're here. And thank you for taking the time to do this today. I'm really excited.
I love you too.
Again, just to hit on the idea of I'm going to tell everybody a story, and this is the only way that is really going to in any way have something to do with the service industry today, is that when I met Katie, I was in the service industry, and I'll get into that in a second. But sincerely, ever since I met Katie, I really wanted to be able to tell her story. I think I wrote something and tried to get it published, and that went nowhere. And then later on, we talked about potentially doing a documentary, and that didn't go through. And now we're here, and I really can't wait to be able to tell all of you people out there this story. So let's jump into it. When I was 23 years old, I lived in New York City. I was working in Wall Street. I had a group of friends that I had outgrown. I hated my job. I hated my place in life. And I was ready for a change. And as a matter of fact, I was out visiting friends in Washington, D.C. Shout out Matt Fortier, who Katie knows. And I took some mushrooms. And I just had this epiphany of life is short. You're young. Get the fuck out of New York City. Move to D.C., I wanted to focus on writing. I wanted to change my setting. I wanted to change my direction in life. And I thought that when I was going to go to DC that I'd meet all these young, intelligent, excited people who were here to make a real difference in the world. And what I actually found was just kind of boring people who were just very career oriented, very selfish all anybody wants to talk to you about is what you do for a living, and everybody's wearing the same clothing. And I found it wasn't for me. And one night I'm sort of already over DC at this point and looking for something to inspire me. And I'm at a bar called Marvin's that's not there anymore on U Street. And amongst all these little bureaucratic people in their little polos and whatever, is this wild woman in the middle of the bar rapping about girls in Liberia. And like truly, like sincerely, like scaring people off, because DC again is like, these people are afraid of their own shadow. And this woman was just so fiery and sincere, and didn't give a fuck what anybody had to say about it, and was just there, just telling her story. And I was attracted to it like a moth to a flame. I just immediately, here's a person who, this is what I was hoping for in terms of the energy of DC. So we start talking, and Katie had pretty recently started an organization called More Than Me, in which she was trying to raise money for young girls in Liberia to be able to go to school, to be able to have housing. For those of you who don't know, Liberia was, and I don't know if it still is, was the third poorest country in the world. It had been decimated by a civil war, and the people were struggling and the children were struggling. And Katie had been there, had seen these children, and had made it her goal, her life goal, to raise money for these girls to be able to better their lives. And so that was her focus. And when I met her, she pretty much didn't have a dime to her name. And she was living off the generosity of others, staying with people's homes, being fed by whomever, you know, but she was so inspiring. And there was something about her that was just so magnetic, that she had a group of people constantly who were willing to give her a house and find her a meal, because she was doing something that everybody believed in. And so I started working for More Than Me, helping out, volunteering. And there was this grassroots group of people, and they were all fucking awesome and just like organic and out there and ready to fight for this. And that was like the closest thing that I ever found to what I thought I was going to find in DC was More Than Me, for sure. Just people who cared about something other than themselves. They weren't there for the money. They were there because they wanted to do something good, and because they were inspired by somebody. And that person was Katie. Katie and I became friendly. She would come hang out with me at the restaurants that I would work at. So this is like the one little connection to the service industry. And I was new in the service industry. And I remember one time you told me that you're like, I don't like talking to you when you're at work. Like, you're a lot more fun when you're not at work, because I think I was so stressed out. But I would try to sneak her some food if I could, and always just. And then, you know, one of the visuals that I have in my mind is Katie was so well up for money, and was doing so much and spread so thin to try to even just survive day to day, and was willing to compromise all this stuff in order to try to get this organization off the ground, that she was going through hormone treatments to be able to sell her eggs so that she could just have enough money to keep the organization going. And we would have lunch, and she would literally just pull out a fucking a needle and inject herself at lunch. No big deal, like nothing to see here. Her legs like black and blue. And this was how motivated this young woman was to do something that she really wanted to be doing. And I just remember being so inspired, like truly, sincerely, just never seen it before. I thought I had it in me, and then I saw the person who had it in them, and I was like, oh, I don't have any of that in me. Like I need to get my game up. And so we did some work. The biggest thing that I remember while we were there is we won a $7,000 grant from Windows. We put together this video. We went to a park and we shot this thing all day, and it was just, everybody was about it. And then we won, and it was so exciting. And that money was able to put like 200 girls in school the following year and get them school supplies. And that just felt like such a win. You know, I remember just being so excited about that. And then I moved away from DC. I moved to New York. I tried to stay in touch, but I sort of fell out of touch with Katie after a while and with the organization. And the story past that is absolute insanity. And truly one of the most inspiring and crazy stories that anybody's going to hear and to live. So that was my experience, and I want to give Katie the platform to tell you people out there and tell the world her side of things. So Katie, welcome. I love you.
That's so funny. I haven't thought about a lot of that stuff, like those early days in a while. But yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the egg donation, because I'm now going through IVF to like have a baby.
Yeah.
It's weird to be on the other end of it, because
yeah.
I'm 40 now. So I was in my late 20s then, just a different, and I remember being so excited to have one of the meals from your restaurant where they were just delicious and such a special treat.
Do you remember that you also told me, because you stayed in the first apartment that I had in DC was not a good apartment. I lived in the hood of DC, and I told Katie, like, if you want to stay with me, you're welcome to stay with me. And she stayed in my basement, and she came up the next day and she's like, I've been to Africa and this is the worst place I've ever stayed in a night. That was so
Oh my
funny.
gosh. Yeah, I was gonna say I kind of vaguely remember this basement that it was just horrible. Like cement floor with like I don't know what it was, but
it was like a makeshift music stage too, because my roommate was a musician. Yeah, it was not good. It was like staying in a prison. But yeah, so speaking of the egg donations and now where you're at now, you are recently a mother, which is congratulations. That's amazing.
yes.
And but what I would like to, and I'm actually curious, we'll circle back to this, when it comes to children, because this is what you were trying to protect the entire time. And now you have one. And I wonder how much that's changed your perspective on things. But I'd like to start from the beginning. How did this idea, the inception of the idea, where did it come from?
Yeah, I think the original, well, then I know where the name came from and like the idea. I moved to Liberia when I was 23. It was an internship, almost like a Peace Corps situation, right after I graduated from college. So I moved from Minnesota, where I went to university, to Liberia. And so I didn't choose Liberia. This group that I had got this internship with assigned me to the country of Liberia. I didn't really know much about it at the time. And I remember just Googling it and learning about the Civil War. I was still pretty much a kid myself. So that's how I ended up in Liberia. And then I ended up I did a 6-month contract and then like for an internship, and then got invited back to do a few months with a film crew who needed extra set of hands. So that second time I was a lot more independent, like taking taxis, kind of being on my own. And the whole time, like you meet kids on the street and they're selling or doing whatever they can to make money. And it's hard to, you see these kids, they talk to you. It's easier to write off the adults, but like to see these kids and start talking to them. And the language there is Liberian English. At first I thought it was another language, but eventually you start understanding it. And yeah, these kids are just telling you that their biggest dream in the whole world is to go to school. And it wasn't like it took thousands of dollars. It was a few $100s to send a kid to school. And at the time there wasn't any free school. So that was at the point where I started like looking for a couple $100s from my community back home in Jersey or Minnesota, just writing to friends and family. I think MySpace was cool back then. And I was posting like stories and kind of like a blog situation, asking for money. And people were sending me money to put kids in school. So that was kind of how it started. I never I thought about maybe making it into an organization. But I just remember feeling like I'm not the type of person that starts a nonprofit.
Sure.
Like these are those DC kids that you're talking about.
Yeah.
They have trust funds and they had like in my head, I had this idea of what those people look like. And I wasn't that.
Yeah.
So just feeling inadequate. And eventually one of my friends tells me, I tell him all these fears and he's like, Katie, get the F over yourself. It's not about you. And, cause I'm like, I'm not this, I'm not that, I can't do it. And I just played that in my head over and over again. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's not about you. And like thinking about these kids who I was meeting. And really they were the center of, why I did what I did. That was the motivation. And to me, there was nothing worse in the entire, universe than like a little kid being on the street, working when they want to go to school. And especially like later the organization evolved. It started off, we were supporting boys and girls, but eventually I met young girls who were being sexually exploited because they were on the street and they were in a much more vulnerable position. So we decided with our limited resources that we're just going to focus on girls. and really look for the girls that were at the highest risk of being sexually exploited. Some of those girls at the time, I didn't have the right wording, or, we were just saying help girls get off the street and into school, or like even using the word child prostitute, which you come to learn you're not, that's not the correct. But these, they're not choosing this. They're under 18, they're being exploited. But that's where, that's how it started. If I couldn't do the paperwork, I found, I made friends with a lawyer, and like poured my heart out to Erica Duncan, being like, please.
Yeah.
She helped do the paperwork. And if I couldn't, like Stephanie Hood, she was in DC, and just like very professional nonprofit expertise with her master's degree in it. I'm like, I met her and I was like, you have all these skills I don't have. Can you please come in and help? Like anyone I could meet, like you had all these friends, you were so popular, and like I'm like, Laurent, you could help with fun, and everyone came together, and it was just, it was really beautiful.
It was. It truly was. And I think if I can speak to what I saw as somebody who found myself kind of magnetically attracted to you, and even Stephanie Hood, who shout out to Stephanie Hood, was a phenomenal. I think she was the yin to your yang. I mean, for you were this just outpouring of emotion and passion, and just like wildly passionate about this thing. And she was the quiet bookkeeper who was able to take that passion and package it in a way that would be effective to start making the money that was necessary. So I think in all major successes, you sort of need that relationship with the two sides of that coin. But I think the reason why, even though you didn't necessarily see yourself as somebody who was the right person to start the thing, the reason why you were is because you had something that none of these other people had, especially in DC, which was a pure and sincere focus and desire to do good about one thing. And I think DC, those guys want that too. A lot of them really do want to be attached to that, but it's more difficult than you would think to find something that's really important. And so I think you just gave people what they already wanted, which was your passion was what they needed. And then you find a lawyer, and you find the person who can do the paperwork, and you find people who are willing to get your message out to their friends and start to, do the fundraising stuff. And you had all those people from the beginning, that doesn't happen by luck. That doesn't happen by chance. That happens because you had something special that very quickly started this group, intentionally or unintentionally. So at what point do you come back to the States? Or are you constantly just going back and forth between Liberia?
Well, I didn't have money to go back and forth in the early days too often. So when it first started, when I first started helping kids, I was there already with these other organizations. But then in 2007, I came back, and that's, I met all of you around 2009. And we didn't have money for me to go back until I think it was 2010 or 2011. It took a while to actually raise the funds. And that first $7,000 was the beginning, very, very beginning days of. And I remember thinking about, like, we had someone who donated a flight, and I was like, I didn't have money for a taxi because we were all not getting paid, or volunteers were like, every dollar goes to the girls.
Right.
And it was just, looking back, I'm like, that was kind of silly. Like maybe we could have allocated some money for food and taxis.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and that was being voiced by people at the time. I remember, I remember a lot of the people being like, Katie, take take a stipend from this money. There's nothing wrong with that. So that you can know where your next meal is coming from. But you were so, passionate about every cent goes to them. And look, you continued to make it happen. So in those early days, you're just kind of going off doing the thing, right? Like there's not a whole lot of like thought and strategy, much more than this is what I want. I mean, and this is how I'm going to get it. I'm just going to go out and rap on the streets and do whatever and talk to whoever I can. Was that more or less the thought process?
Well, I think other people came in to bring in a plan, like Stephanie and I did talk about, how could we get grants? Like, what do we, what do we need to measure? And in the early days, it was a scholarship program. So we were helping mostly girls get to school. And that first trip to Liberia, we were looking for community partners that can help us identify the most vulnerable kids. And so that was the work in Liberia, just trying to find these community partners. We used a group called Global Giving to find this women's group in West Point. And then I had made friends with these international development people who I had seen as experts that introduced me to McIntosh, who was a guy who was doing like what it seemed to be amazing community-based work with children through a sports program and like helping to house homeless girls who were sexually exploited. So we met him, and I was like originally only wanting to work with women, but being like so taken by his heart and his work, and just like who he seemed to be in the community and how the community responded to him. I remember calling Stephanie being like, we should reconsider only working with women. Like maybe we should also like think about, working with this guy too.
Right. And
it wasn't just him. He actually worked with this woman named Gloria. So we had these two community partners that we were working with that were kind of suggesting children that could be on the scholarship program. So it was, the short version of the story is like 1 turns to 30, turns to like 100, and we've got 100 kids on scholarship who would have never been to school before. On top of school, like we would always promise like 1 year of school plus 2 additional years. We would raise funds for each child for 3 years. So it wasn't like they go to school and then we didn't raise enough money, so they're on the street.
Yeah.
And then we had meals. It started out with lunch, but eventually became breakfast and lunch because they were like very hungry in the morning too.
Sure.
School supplies, so like a backpack. They had pencils, and we had a couple schools. There was this one main school that was near this West Point community, which was one of the poorest slums in West Africa. This one community school that the community told me about. So we partnered with them, and that's where the most of the children ended up going. But when I would show up, once a year, twice a year, when I'd come in and out of the country, you kind of see that this school is like the kids are not really learning anything. They're in a uniformed crowd. And that kind of led us to say, like, maybe we should be, actually we had a parent teacher meeting with all the parents, and we asked them, what should we do about this problem? They're like, the schools are not up to standard. We have to start our own if we want our kids to really learn. So it was their idea. And we went off looking for a building, and I ended up in a meeting with the president of Liberia. At the time was the first female president in Africa, wow. One of the first female presidents in the world. Wow. President Sirleaf. And so I'm like, I can't believe I'm sitting with this lady. And it was,
when was that? Like what year was that?
I would say, well, we opened the school in 2013. So I think it was like 2011.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm sitting with her, and she said, like, as long as you're serving the children of Liberia, we have a few, like, these were like bombed out, looted buildings that were not being used post-war. And they had someone from her, administration show me a few different buildings, and they're like, which one do you think would work best? And we like picked this. They're all like really bad condition, like homeless people living in them, drug addicts, needles, feces. And, the pictures of these buildings, crazy. So we end up taking one of the buildings, and we're like, well, how are we going to fix this thing up?
Right.
Like thousands of dollars.
Right.
So.
Well, so I have a question for you. At that time, as much as you're capable of remembering where your head was at, you get the ball rolling, right? You have this idea, you start getting some money for it. People are actually starting to get excited about that, getting you money. You're winning some smaller grants. You have people on your team. Now you're in a meeting with the president of Liberia. You're walking down, you're talking about starting your own school. These are some pretty significant jumps that are happening pretty quickly. Do you remember how you were feeling at the time? Was it just sort of a singular focus of like, we're doing this without a lot of background noise? Or were you thinking like, this is a lot? am I sure about what I'm doing, or you know what I mean? Was there any doubt in your mind at that time, or did you feel pretty direct about it?
I feel like I always, at the time, like thinking back then, I'm like, I always felt like we weren't moving fast enough.
Yeah.
Because you constantly have kids that are asking for help.
Yeah.
And you need a place where, a safe place for where they can eat, a place where it's contained, so you can then bring in professionals to introduce them to. But even, I remember I guess once we got the school open, and that's a whole thing in itself, and we, win this $1 million grant, and it was crazy. We also did have a partner, local businesses, that helped us to fix that building. It wasn't the $1 million only. Like, that was, the $1 million came from, we win this big Facebook competition, which was out of this world, and that's its own story in itself. But then the group that we won it from was Chase, and they were going to give it to us over the course of several years. It wasn't like one check, $1 million. And they wanted to make sure that there was a plan, that we knew what we were doing every year,
Sure.
that we knew what the future, there's a whole plan that goes along with that. So yeah, it felt like we weren't moving fast enough. Although, like, I don't think I ever stopped to really debrief and think through, yes, we did have plans. There were always people around that were thinking like that, strategic.
Sure.
I feel like I would seek out people who were opposite of me.
Sure.
To help balance that. Eventually we found board members that, were asking tough questions, and that wanted to, we had when we opened the school, there was a whole group of advisors on just that were experts in education that could help us hire the right people, that knew about curriculums. And I mean, those were not expertises that I had. So we had people advising in those things.
Well, again, as somebody who was there to see it happen in real time, another reason why I think you were successful, whether or not you saw yourself as a leader in those ways, I think all the best leaders realize, I'm not going to be able to do all these things on my own. I need to put people in positions that know what the hell they're doing about things that I don't know, and give them the autonomy and agency to do that work, and trust them to do that work. And I think you did that very well. And that allowed you to do what you do best, which is just be this unstoppable beam of energy and passion. Anybody who's listening, please go look up some Katie Meyler, old school Katie Meyler clips, when she's just pouring her heart out about the women in Liberia, because there's a different frequency about that, and you in those days, and that fire, and that I think anybody who would, if you go out and you watch some of those videos, I think you'll start to see why Katie was successful, and why so many people.
I think that it did. I know that I evolved, and it did start out, not that I ever lost the passion, but I think the passion transforms or evolves. And yeah. So we end up opening a school. Then that first year that the school opened, which it was an amazing feat to get the school open, but it wasn't the best year. It was we had a bunch of international teachers co-teaching with Liberians. The kids didn't always understand the American English. The curriculum stuff was difficult because kids were all at different places, and it was very bumpy, to say the least. But one of the things that I am proud of, which is kind of where, gets us to where we are today, I'm proud of, but also it's not proud of, obviously. But in that, we had social workers, and we had a school nurse, and there was, within a few months of opening that school, a girl came forward to talk about, to tell our school nurse that she was being sexually abused. And as horrifying, obviously, we have lots to talk about with that if you want to ask any questions. Sure. But I'm proud that the staff made that girls felt safe enough to tell, a girl, felt safe enough to say that. And it was within it, I believe that happened in December. So September, October, November, December, within 4 months of opening a school. And there is a lot of research that talks about when you provide a safe place, girls will talk. Yep. So prior to that, we had a scholarship program, and there wasn't a place for girls to talk. So the fact that we opened that school did help us to get that information. Unfortunately, that nurse didn't tell anybody until June. So she knew from December till June, nobody knew. She told our country director in June, and within 4 days, McIntosh, who, I had put a lot of trust into, way too much trust into, was in jail, like within 4 days of finding out.
Yeah.
And it turned out that it was more than one girl. Eventually it was 10 girls that were testifying against him. And we believe it's possible, that he abused more than the 10. But at the same time as that all was unraveling and we were figuring that out, like Ebola was coming to Liberia. So we have Ebola happening and hitting West Point. It ends up coming from the city or from kind of like the rural areas and comes into the city. And I remember thinking, if Ebola hits West Point, like West Point is just going to be like gone. Like everyone's going to die, because the rates of people dying at the time were pretty high. It was like, it was like, I don't know the exact numbers, but it was like, it felt like people had a 50-50 chance of living.
Yeah.
And, and then it did get to West Point.
And so you're on the ground at this point. You're living in West Point. Yeah.
I never lived in West Point.
Okay.
I lived at West Point. There were times I stayed in West Point. But no,
But you were living in Liberia.
I lived in Monrovia in Capitol
Okay.
Hill, which was, like a 7-minute bike ride to West Point.
Okay.
But yeah, no, at the time when Ebola hit, I came back, I was in Liberia when I found out McIntosh had abused the girls, I flew back to Liberia within a week. I was there, testified again, like was a complainant in the case against him, stood in front of him and said, then we had to, Ebola was in town. So we had to first we had to make sure those girls that were testifying were safe and they had a safe place to be, because there would be retaliation from the community against them. It was a very bold, brave thing of them to come forward. And then we had to get all of the President's relief said all international staff that are not directly helping with Ebola relief need to leave the country. So we had to figure out how to get we had to get everybody out, all of our international staff, which we had a lot that first year, out of the country, and there was no goodbye. And these people had spent a year serving, in Liberia, and they were just left kind of quick in this, Ebola thing. And they just experienced this traumatic, girls coming forward, hearing these horrible stories too. So
Jesus.
I know those international staff and volunteers left. And then I also left, and we had a board meeting in the States. And then Ebola started coming into the city, and I was in the States. And once it hit West Point, I was like, there was no way I was going to hang out in the States. I wanted to go back. The board didn't really want me to go back. They're like, this is not safe. It's crazy. And I was like, okay, if you don't want me to go back, I'm going to go back on my own as just a friend to Liberia and help. And then they put some steps in place to make sure I'd be safe. And they were like, if you stay in this place and report back every day and
Sure.
do this, that, we will, pay, just make sure that you're taken care of and that you're, we'll support you. So that's kind of how the Ebola work started.
So I didn't realize that I thought you were on the ground. I knew kind of secondhand that I had been hearing, because this was a big deal. I think most people will remember when Ebola kind of rocked parts of Africa, and there was a fear pre-COVID of it being brought here and us having our own pandemic here. And I had heard that I thought that you were on the ground, and where most people who had the resources to leave had left, that you decided to stay. But you actually came back to the States and then decided to go back and try to help. I didn't realize that.
In August. It started really coming to the city, I think June, early July. And then once we found out it was in West Point, I think that was end of July, early August, I headed back and stayed until around Christmas. I came back in December.
What was that
like? It was crazy. Yeah, it was. I mean, what was it like? I mean, I write spoken word poems. There's that poem is really powerful. I'll have to share a link with you. But no, I mean, it was scary, very scary at first. But what happens is you're there for a while and it becomes less scary and you become more comfortable.
Yeah.
And you are down a little bit, and that's when it's really scary because. Sure. But I was able to get permission every day back and forth with the board, and we realized that in West Point, they didn't believe Ebola was real in the beginning. And it was like, they were just acting like things were normal. And even our students felt that way. And I felt like if I could see the students and convince them that even if they don't believe it, just to listen, not to touch anybody, not,
Right, right.
wash their hands. And I learned and changed and evolved drastically in that time, in that few months. I mean, in that emergency, because you become like you built a crazy amount of trust with the community and showing up with the country, not just the community, but like the country, the, different leaders, the different NGOs, and then also just becoming like what it really understanding what partnership means and not being able to take credit, like seeing who, because that's a big part is like people want, if I get the, they want the credit, everything. And it's like, we might not even live through, like people may not live to the other side of this,
right. And a lot of them didn't, right? I mean, you had a neighbor who passed away, I remember. I think you knew a lot of the community that wound up passing away. Is that not correct?
I wouldn't say I was like close friends, but our students had family members that died. And yes, I saw dead people in the street. We would see, if you go into the Ebola or like near the Ebola treatment units, there were people laying outside of those deceased. And then I also was at one point getting a test for Ebola myself, thinking that I had it. And while I'm on the phone, I didn't tell this person where I was. Forget who I was talking to, like Global Giving or something. This lady next to me who I just got done like praying with and talking to, I was telling, because she was worried about dying. I was like, "You got this, mama. You're fine. Let's say a prayer," like singing. Yeah. She died right in front of me, like rolling over with blood, the whole, like lots of crazy images. It was an intense time. I would say that like some of the work that, during that point that, a lot of people talked about was, there was a time where like nobody wanted to take in the children because, and it made sense. Like if you take in if a kid's parents are dead or their family members are dead, like the neighbors typically in Liberia would take care of them or like extended family. But this time, if you take in this child, you're actually putting your own children at risk too.
Sure.
So these kids were left, many of them were left alone. And it became a huge issue, which the country was working quickly to address, but it sometimes you couldn't move fast enough for different reasons. But, there was a little girl we saw in a pink party dress on an ambulance stairs, and she was three years old, and she just watched her mom die. And I'm like, where is she going to go? And they were like, she's going to go into the treatment unit, like where all these people had Ebola. And I was like, well, she's not sick. And if she goes in there, she's going to get sick. And they're like, well, there's nowhere else for her to go. So we were able to like make some phone calls and whatever. We had an extra building, and we had some volunteers that from our school, like our kindergarten teacher, Benu, risked her life, and it was a big risk because, what if something happened to Benu? That would also be my fault, and it would be the organization's fault.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
So, everybody had training and how to wear a protective gear, and Benu and her friend from church watched Perlina, was this little girl, and counted down the 25 days, and she lived, and it ended up being that we were able to help a few kids during that time, like a handful of kids, until they had the country had their own official place that opened, and we were able to then help kids get there and support. We didn't want to do, it was like, you don't want to do this work. It was like, you had to do it. It was like, whatever it was like filling in the gaps and partnering and seeing how maybe sharing the needs to the West and getting funding, we could support the people that were doing the work. There was no ambulance. The country had like there's so many stories. It's not ending.
Well, I remember hearing about, and one particular thing is that you were briefly, Vice went out to do a documentary about what was happening in Africa with Ebola. You were on that documentary for a short amount of time, and the cameraman from that documentary was, I think, the first American death from Ebola. And so I remember that rocking me, because that was like this connection of like, that's how close you were to it. I mean, the guy who had the camera while you were being interviewed or whatever was going on wound up dying from Ebola. Like that's
he actually, I think I know who you're talking about, and I always forget his name because he was supposed to move into our house. but he didn't die. He did get Ebola. And then
I thought he passed.
I don't know if any Americans died. Maybe a Liberian American guy died. I'm not, I don't remember. I have to like go back and remember because, but I know that this particular guy, he came to the States, he was like air flown, and they were going to make him pay for it out of his own pocket.
Jesus.
It wasn't Vice. It was like, he was in between Vice and NBC, and he was working for different groups.
Okay.
And yeah, but he ended up thankfully living, and he lives in Brooklyn. So maybe you two can go get a beer. Ashoka is his name. You can talk to him. He knows all about about this story.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Yeah, but I mean, so crazy time, and not that, because truly one of the things that I love about you, and that I think this world needs more of, is that you're not. I never got one inkling of thought that like somewhere behind all this passion and whatever is a desire for attention or accolades or anything. I really don't think that that's the case with you, and I love you for that. But so you get named one of Time's People of the Year, yeah, from your work in Ebola, which is insane and also well deserved. And I can't imagine what that would feel like for you. But I want to circle back. So that just to hit a little bit of chronological, so people can get the pace of what's happened here. Again, Katie and I meet. We're talking about scrapping for dollars, right? And selling our eggs for just to be able to stay afloat. And then we're getting a little bit more support, and it's growing and it's growing, it's growing. When does the Chase thing happen?
I think we won that in 2011, 2012.
So that's pretty quick.
Yeah.
That's an amazingly quick jump.
Yeah. It must be 2012. We opened the school, I remember, in September of 2013. I have a timeline. I just don't have it in front of me.
That's all right.
Yeah. So we opened the school in 2013, September, and then Ebola hits really hard that summer, and it's 2014, and that's right when McIntosh had gone to jail. Jesus Christ,
this is all happening right in the. But if you don't mind, just parking for a second at like what the experience with Chase was like. Can you walk me through just a little bit of like how you even got involved with that, and then how that all went down?
Yeah, I mean, it was the beginning days still, really. We're a few years into a scholarship program. A lot, we're raising funds from individuals, throwing parties like the ones we had in DC. We would do those. I had a group in, we had a group of people in LA that also was really helpful with throwing parties. A handful of people in New York. There were like some pockets of people that were helping a lot. And, so our funds mainly came from like wealthy individuals or just regular people that came together to throw a party. But there were also these competitions where it was like, if you vote for this cause on Facebook and they get the most amount of votes, this group can win $25,000. And Chase had those a few times, and Microsoft had like part of that was a video. And so we did one with Ford. And it was this building. We won 7,000, then we won 10,000, then we won 25,000. And then there was like the mega, I believe Chase only did this competition three times, and it was $1 million prize. And anyone who had a 501c3 charity could be, participate in trying to be one of the, I think it was 25 organizations competing, but you had to like get this, there were like different rings of the competition. It's like, all right, we got past this one. Now we're in this. And then eventually we became one of the 25 organizations that were competing. And like, even if we lost, it was going to be, we were all going to have our organizations featured on primetime television, which was going to be awesome. No matter what, there was like a no lose situation. There was going to be a winner from each category who won $100,000. And that was like my goal, because our organization was still so small at the time. The board had allocated $5,000 marketing budget to help us win that $1 million. And to me, it made the most sense to just like have the bar set at like, let's win our category of $100,000.
Sure.
Because we're competing against these organizations. There's no way, they have their marketing budgets are $50,000 or whatever, $100,000. So yeah, it was just like get the most amount of votes. And the campaign was originally going to be it started out with somehow, I forget how it generated into like I Am Abigail, which was the name of one of our students. But it, like, writing it on celebrities' foreheads, like we had Justin Bieber and
Really? I didn't know that.
oh, not in real life, but like
Okay.
his photo and wrote I Am Abigail on their head. And like we're asking people to make that their profile picture, asking people to vote. And it didn't really catch. Like it felt like people didn't. And I remember sending it to one of my friends in Minnesota, and he's like, I'm not putting any famous person on my thing, but he's like, I'll put it on my own forehead. So he writes I Am Abigail on his forehead, and I got goosebumps head to toe. Like it was like, whoa, that's powerful. So that became the whole thing, is like, write I Am Abigail on your forehead. But of course people took it and they like wrote it in really sexy places on their body. And like, it was just like, people made it their own. They did it with their dad. They, families were doing it. And it was just like, we belong to one another was the message. And that no little girl, despite like, no matter where she comes from in the world, deserves to be on the street when her biggest dream is to go to school. And that message really felt like tangible, organic. It came through, and it was powerful, and it went viral.
Yeah.
And I didn't think we were going to win the whole thing, but I definitely thought we had a chance at winning our category. So we show up to this, they fly us to Hollywood to film the thing. I had to get it dressed. I remember like going to get it dressed right before the show started, and I kept the tags on it so I could return it afterwards. I had them tucked in. Like it was this, and I'm like, I didn't have money to buy a $100, $200 dress or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah.
So we're on the show, and like we end up winning the category.
And the award goes to More Than Me Foundation.
The More Than Me Foundation from Washington, D.C. provides scholarships, uniforms, and supplies to help young girls in Liberia attend school and further their education.
And it's like, holy crap, I cannot believe this. And it's unbelievable. I'm shaking. I had just wrote this like on the plane from wherever I was coming into LA. I had wrote the speech. They told us all to write a speech and send it to them. And it was just like, I gave it my all when I wrote the talk, and it, they put it up on the screen for me to read. And it was so powerful and beautiful. And, it was unbelievable. But then at the end, they had all the winners come up on the stage of the 5 different categories. We were in education. Then there was like, who know, like food or, what each, group had their own thing.
Right.
And they opened it's Joe McHale, like the comedian.
Joe McHale.
McHale, yeah. And like there was like this, after I won the $100,000, I had I Am Abigail on my head, like Miss America picks me up and spins me around. Hootie and the Blowfish is like, and they're all there. And they're like writing. Miss America goes, can I write I Am Abigail on my forehead? And I'm like, oh my God. This is crazy.
Let's go.
Like meeting these people felt very like normal, like they felt normal. Like, I don't know. It didn't feel like, we had put all these famous people on pedestals, but they're just people. And they do care, like if they can see it's a real thing. So that was just awesome. So we're all standing there. I'm not nervous at all. About this $1 million thing. I'm trying to think like which organization was going to win. Definitely not thinking it's us at all. And then he pulls out the card and he reads More Than Me. And like, I was 100% shocked out of my mind. My knees buckled. Like I thought I was going to pee in my dress. And I just start screaming at the top of my lungs. And Joe McHale goes like, you should have had a career in screaming. Like, sometimes I wonder, like, did we really win? Like, or did they just pick us because they knew I would have the most dramatic, like, I don't know.
Sure. Who knows?
I have no idea, but we won. And so it was a game changer. And it's not like they wrote us a check for $1 million and gave it to us the next day. It was like 6 months, 8 months, 9 months later, we got our first installment of like 100 and something, it was like little bits at a time. And they were helping us, made sure that we had a 5-year plan and all that stuff. But it was just like, it was a shock of a life. I don't think I've ever been that. Finding out Macintosh abused girls was pretty shocking too. There were a few shocking moments, but this was a happy one, you know?
Just a couple. What was this? Was that the same time that Warren Buffett proposed to you?
No, I think that might have. I don't remember the order. I have to like get the timeline out.
Yeah. All good.
I think that happened after, and there were like a few really big moments on this side, meaning like in the United States. There was always like felt like there's the fundraising aspect of the organization and there's the program aspect, and there were always like huge milestones and huge things that happen. You know, you need the stuff in the U.S. to happen, or
of course,
in order to do the stuff in the program. But no, we had I had met one of the editors of Forbes magazine, and they do an event every year where they bring together the world's wealthiest people for a conversation around philanthropy. And so I'm sitting with one of the editors, and like, I don't know, he didn't invite me to do a talk or anything. I forget how someone made an intro to him, and I was just like, I went in there and I like did one of my poems, and I like gave him a card, like a photo. I think I gave him a photo with his like name on it or something. And
Amazing.
then I was like, you know, don't let these girls like off of your mind. And I heard he put the card like in front of his desk, and he would just look at it all the time.
That's amazing.
Which was the point, you know,
right?
Of
course.
And they were really good, like the business cards with the photos of the girls' faces, or even print photos. So he called me eventually. I don't remember how soon after this editor called, and he was just like, listen, you got 10 minutes in front of the world's wealthiest people. And so that's how, and that was like another shock of like screaming. I was when I found that out.
That's amazing.
And I was like, this has got to be the best talk of my entire life.
Yep.
Just preparing. And and then after I did that talk, that was where Warren Buffett was there, and Stephen Forbes, who's super normal. Actually, Warren Buffett was shockingly normal. Like he showed up to this event, and he I remember thinking like, I don't even know who these other billionaires are. Like they have like these, like they have like security or whatever. Like they just see like that you knew. And then Warren comes in and his hair's all messed up, and he came out of a yellow taxi, and like he doesn't have any security. He's just so unassuming. Like he's just normal.
Yeah.
But no, I had asked him for a photo at the end of a lunch thing. And he's like, let's make this more interesting. And he got down on one knee to propose as like a joke. And then someone said,
I don't know if that's a joke. Gonna say yes.
Goes, no prenup.
You should have taken those odds right there, Katie. But okay, so we go from a dream, seeing girls living in situations that nobody should ever live in, especially not children, living under cars, living on the streets, being exploited sexually. I mean, the worst things that you can imagine. You see that, you get fed up enough to really try to make this, to do something about it. And that's pretty much all you got in the start. And you start getting people on board with your passion and your poetry and that whatever that is, that thing about Katie Meyler that you have. You get people interested, and within a couple of years, not only do you have an organization around you, but you win $1 million for this organization. You are now prepped you have made your dream a reality. You've went from these humble beginnings to now pretty much having everything that you could possibly want for these women. You're going to Liberia. You're meeting with the president of Liberia. She's there to help you. You guys seem to have a good, however serious that relationship is, but she's there on board with it. She was at the ribbon cutting. I remember seeing that picture. Everything is going well. Ebola hits and Macintosh. You find out that this person who, and I wanted to also say for those listening at home, from what I remember, Katie, and remind me if I'm wrong, or tell me if I'm wrong, you were so set out on, we're not buying things from merchants outside of Liberia. Like, we're going to make sure that the money that goes in for school supplies and that goes in for construction, as much as it can, is going to be going into the Liberian economy. And the same thing goes with the staff, right? So Macintosh was this guy who was an ex-Liberian soldier. Is that correct?
That's the story he did share. He told me.
Okay, so and Katie wanted to entrust this organization when she wasn't on the ground to people from Liberia because of how much it meant to you to leave this in their hands and to not make it to make it their own, as opposed to being this sort of outside whatever. So you get through all this stuff. Warren Buffett proposes to you. You should have said yes, but that's all right. That's neither here nor there. And now you're dealing with the Ebola crisis and with the Macintosh crisis. And how do things go from that point?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really proud of the work that we were able to, the partnership that we had with community during Ebola. I learned a lot. I also could see like the root cause of why Ebola had the toll that it did came down to like eroded systems. There wasn't a strong enough healthcare system. And to prevent a thing like Ebola, like we have in the United States. And that the reason why those systems are not as strong as they are is because a lot of it lacks, human capacity. It was just the lack of a lot of the people, anyone who could get out of the country at that time. Many of them fled and left, and not everybody, but obviously many did. And that left a lot of gaps. And you could see that. I mean, and I have prime examples of it. We won't get into all of that, but like I realized from that, I was like, without a healthcare system, you're going to have something like this happen. And then with the Macintosh case, we could see about the justice system. These were wonderful people we were working, we believe that, the people that were prosecuting Macintosh were doing the best that they could, but it was still like there were gaps. And it was, you're like, it's a similar thing. How could we ever stop girls being sexually exploited in a country where the justice system needed support? And, and so I was like, yes, we have this one school, and these girls at the school have helped me really get to know and care about people, put faces, when you have a name, it's hard to walk away from a story, a name, a friend. It's easier to walk away from a statistic or, something nameless. So those girls were the reason that I started thinking about system change and how can we help, because we didn't have enough space in the school to continue to bring to address these larger issues. Yes, I did think that these girls would grow up and become the ministers and become the people who worked within the system, some of them, and they could help change the country, but that was going to take so long. And you needed more than like the 300 girls that were at that school. You needed, how do we help the whole country? Right. So I met with the Minister of Education and I said, I have this huge spotlight right now because I became Time Person of the Year. How can I use this spotlight by the way, I could feel from the Time Person of the Year. And then I was also named one of 25 People magazine's 25 women changing the world, next to like Sheryl Sandberg and Oprah. And it was like even though this attention brought some funding or credibility, it also brought a lot of heat, and Liberia is a small country, and I could feel the jealousy, and I just knew it was bad. I knew with the Macintosh case, like this, even though it had been he had been in jail now for a couple of years, there were like trial was waiting because of Ebola, and then the trial, when the trial started to go in progress for him, it just felt like some time had passed, and he had been in jail that whole time. But I lost my train of thought here. I went to the Minister of Education and I said, how can I use this spotlight to address a bigger, to help with the education system, like at general, like what are your goals and how can I help support you in those goals? And I didn't really have the highest hopes at the time. I'm a dreamer, I'm a visionary. But, when you think of government officials it was just like, is this really going to amount to anything? Sure. And it turned out that this guy, actually, his name was Minister George Warner, had this huge, wonderful heart, wanted to make a difference. And he was like, he thought I was a fresh breath of air. He was used to like the bureaucrat type thing that you're talking about. Sure. I came in there with a poem and he was I love this and whatever. We clicked and he asked me if I could replicate because of our school had the next year after Ebola, we opened the school. We had local people running the school. We didn't do the international teacher thing anymore. We did have some international staff that were brought in who had an education background that were doing trainings, or, we had a country director named Laura who lives in DC. And our students had 100% pass rate, and Minister Warner wanted to replicate what we were doing at the academy inside the public school system.
Okay.
So that conversation ended up turning into this huge education reform it was a public-private partnership, which is now in hundreds of schools across the country. And then also the Ministry of Education in Ghana and Nigeria. And also I heard it went to India, like it's all over, it's growing all over the world. And it's where I don't know if some countries may choose to just only work with local partners, but it's like where these private partners can then support the public schools and making them stronger. And there's a lot to say about that, but that partnership was amazing, but it also had controversy. And so the trial was going on while that partnership was being created. The school was continuing to go, and the school was this place in Monrovia that we could bring in. I guess it's like a place you could say, oh, we want to do technology. Let's see how this works. You could test it there, and it was a controlled environment, and say, oh, this doesn't work, this works. But so while the Partnership Schools for Liberia was growing and launching, the trial happened. During the trial with McIntosh, it ends up being a hung jury. I guess there's lots of reasons why that might be, but I came across an email not long ago that said it was because the judge was taking bribes or something. But
bribes from who though?
Nobody knows. I don't know. I have no idea. So they were going to do a new trial. And while they were getting ready for a new trial, McIntosh died in prison. And so that was the end of that. And we were like, that was a really sad way for that to end. Sure. And just strange. I don't know, like the girls wanted justice.
Yeah.
But you got to just keep going. So you just keep going, kept moving. Yeah. Partnership Schools for Liberia, and the Girls Academy kept going, and it was exciting. And then there was a new president that came in, which I was kind of seen as like the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. I was seen along with her, even though she did help us, but I wouldn't say like she was my best friend or anything, like we were, sure. And so the new administration came in, and I felt like that protection that you kind of exist with that last government wasn't there anymore. And then we got wind that a negative news story was coming. And the story was going to be about the McIntosh case. And so that actually, I think that was being written over the course of a year, however long that took. And then it came out in 2018, October of 2018. And then we had to do like investigations, and those it was supposed to just last a couple of weeks, but it ends up lasting 9 months. And in the meantime, my sister ends up passing away, and it was just like, my husband missed me. I got married in that time frame, and I was like, I was in Liberia the whole time. Right. The relationship wasn't that going great because I was like married to my organization and my work. The board told me that I needed to resign, or they were going to fire me. So I resigned. And
this is specific, that decision is specifically based off of the heat that you got from the McIntosh situation.
Yeah. I think people didn't know, the board was doing the best they could, but they, sure. They were trying to look for someone to give them advice, and they hired a law firm to advise them. And like that, I was in Liberia at the time, the law firm, I met with them, and they were like, you know what, like this organization's awesome. The best thing, the worst thing that you did was like, you grew so fast that there weren't, these things in place that needed to be there in those early days. And, it looks like you guys have addressed a lot of that. We have suggestions on how you can even get better. And I thought, if anything, I was the CEO, maybe they would take that title away and like say I'm the founder and you have to go to training for this, or that. But they ended up, I don't know. They said they kind of wanted to, they shut the organization down. It was just
yeah. And that's because of McIntosh, more or less.
Yeah, and by this time now it had been like 4 or 5 years since he had been, it was like years away.
And the organization is continuing to prosper in this time, aside from the fact that, McIntosh aside, the school is doing well. You guys are having success in doing what
better than ever. I mean, it was run by like Liberians. There was a group in international development. There was a group that was like highly respected, that does like monitor and evaluation, and they were evaluating learning outcomes, and they had done testing all around the country and found that the kids in the More Than Me partnership schools were performing significantly. They were like performing a lot, outperforming the other schools. And it was just like, it was so clear, but they kind of dismissed it and being like, well, does it really matter if girls are being abused in those schools?
Yeah.
And I never got to respond to that because I was like silenced at that period. But, my feeling towards that was just like, well, first of all, those public schools, I don't know, I'm not aware of anybody talking about sexual abuse in those schools, although I would imagine that it was going on, because I've been told by Peace Corps workers that sexual abuse is in every single school in the country. And you have to be proud if people are going to tell you about sexual abuse. It's not a fun thing to talk about. No one wants to hear about it, but it's like, if you don't know it's existing, how can you prosecute it? How can you address it? How can you do anything about it? Right. And it's being like swept on, because of that, it's like swept under the carpet. And it's like, whatever is happening in these More Than Me public schools is also happening in all the other schools, but our students are talking about it. Why? If they are, why are they?
Right. Because they feel safe to tell you. Yeah. So, okay, Katie, we don't have too much time left with you. So I want to hit a couple of notes here. One question in regards to what you were just saying, because I'm hearing some of this for the first time. Like I knew the basic story of it. I thought the Macintosh thing happened later on. I didn't realize that it was sort of this delayed process. But in any case, you mentioned potential jealousy. And now, thinking about, in the end, what ends up happening is Katie, who built this organization from the ground up, and created this amazing thing that I don't think anybody can argue was, at least what its intention was amazing. And then you're asked to leave because of this. You found out that one of your employees is sexually assaulting these girls, which of course is that's a terrible thing. And I want to talk to you about that in a second as well. But do you believe that there was any sort of conspiracy in the sense of like people wanted you out for their own reasons, whether that be other education or whatever, and they use that as this like way to oust you?
So I want to also make sure you include this in here, because anyone who's going to listen to this that might be like looking for criticism potentially, who knows, Sure. This story is so deep, and there is so much that we have not talked about.
Yes.
Macintosh supposedly died of HIV. There were girls there was one of the 10 girls that came forward had HIV. There were other girls that he supposedly abused that may have had. There's a lot there that I don't think we have time. I have, to unpack. And this is like multiple episodes. There's also, we didn't bring up the fact that like before I hired Macintosh, I spent personal time with him.
Right.
And so that is something that we didn't address. And not that I want to address it, because I'm like, why are we even talking,
Sure.
But there's a lot here. And I also want to make it very clear that under my watch, girls were hurt. And like, there is a responsibility in that. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Like, I don't take that, small in any way.
Of course not.
And I just want to make sure that comes, not for you. I think that, but like, yeah. And I was never trying to hide the abuse, like I have emails that went out to our donors and Facebook posts that went out like immediately after, within weeks of Macintosh, finding out about Macintosh, telling people that this happened. But when I look back at how we talked about it, it's true. Like we did talk about it, but we didn't take responsibility. We didn't say that we could have put things and should have put things. We should have made those sure that didn't happen. Like there should have been better safeguards. Sure. So there's a lot of lessons learned that, would be good to share at some point. And hopefully I get that chance in one outlet or another. I do think the reason that this, it's hard not to think that there's some aspects of jealousy, or I think being white doing this work also in this time frame there's a lot of pieces. Sure. Why I think things happen the way they did. I also do believe in like some force of, I don't know what you want to call it, like a higher power, universe, love, that maybe it was time for me to leave and I wasn't listening. Like, I think that I was supposed to maybe leave earlier than I did, not because of the article. It was just like time to move on and I wasn't letting go. That happens with founders. And like a higher force helps you move forward. Like, I wouldn't have my son, my sister passed away. Her son is now with us. Like, I wouldn't be present for that. Another thing we didn't talk about in any of this is like what led me to do this work too. Like, we didn't hit on any of that story. And like, I have, the reason the passion was there is I connected with these students and these kids, and my personal story is, growing up with, my mom doesn't like it when I say government assistance, but my mother worked very hard and she made minimum wage, and we grew up in a very wealthy community. And I always felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't pretty enough or smart enough. And there was, I had experience of sexual abuse in my life, my sister's life. And so there was a connection to these girls. It wasn't, and I think that I would always feel like, what if these girls were me? Like, how, that's where the passion came from. Also, I think in your 20s and like our generation, especially, there's this, like, we want to do something good for the world. Like, that's like our parent, who cares about, for me, success was not about how much money I made. It was like, how much good did I do? And what did I do with my one life that I got? Sure. So I think some of that was just like in the DNA of the generation. I don't know where it came from. Yeah. But I don't know why. I think the way it ended, yes, there was jealousy, but I think any person who's going to do good in this world or like be successful in any way, there's going to be jealousy.
Sure. I was just curious because that had never occurred to me that could even potentially be the case. I thought it was a very simple black and white. There was a man under your watch who was doing these terrible things. And that led to you being asked to leave, which is understandable. But the way that you told the story, to me, my head went to like, maybe there were some people trying to pull some strings, and whether or not that's the case.
I think there were like several groups of people. Like I could think of all these different, and they get together and like they do. Sure. I mean, this not just happened to me. I mean, it's happened to other friends, not just in this space, but like in any space where there's a new person comes in and they're successful really quickly. There's of course jealousy. Yeah.
And it's understandable too. Like, so, just to touch on two more things while I have you here. Yeah. Katie, I appreciate the humility and I appreciate the fact that you want to let it be said, that you made mistakes and that you take responsibility for those mistakes. On my end, one of the reasons why I started to become so passionate or what reinvigorated me having a passion for telling your story, which is when I reached out about potentially doing a documentary and I'm so excited about this, is I got to see Katie before all the hype, before all the fame, when she was a kid with no fucking money in her pocket, who was doing everything that she could do to try to help these girls. And that's why More Than Me was successful. That's why I jumped on board with it. And to see the success was so inspiring and so shocking. I mean, imagine me in New York City hearing Katie just won $1 million when it was maybe 2 years ago that we were like jumping out of our minds because we won $7,000. And like, nobody could deserve it more. It wasn't, that money could not get spent better by anybody in my mind at that time, is what I'm thinking. And you have this rise and you have this success and you have the right heart and you're doing the right thing. And then this happens. And I want to give you a second to be able to talk about how difficult that must have been to hear for you, because at the end of the day, your intention was to help these women. And the worst thing that could possibly happen under, and I just, that's such a terrible situation to do. But I also want to say, Katie kind of got lambasted by a couple of news stories. I think there was even a documentary that was done that was sort of like basically calling her like a white savior complex person and making this a racial divide and making her look like this selfish, incompetent person. And that pissed me off because I know you and because I love you and because I know what you've been doing. And, whether or not those people really believed that or not, if they did, I don't think they did the research. And otherwise, I think they're looking for a quick buck because it's a really easy sellable story to say, look at this crazy white lady who came to Africa and thought she could like impose her will and then ended up hurting kids. That's easy. That'll sell a story. But that's not what happened. And that's not how it went down. So I feel that it's important for me to say that. And I love you, and I'm so sorry for all the pain that this has caused. But I do want, I'm curious how that felt when you found out about Macintosh.
I'm like, Laurent, I have to get on a call in 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. Well, then no. You know what? We'll do that another time. But
I'm like, I don't want to end with that. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I will do that another time, or maybe we won't. And but you know, I'm sincerely sorry that this has happened to you. So let's instead spend our last couple minutes. Your sister passed. You were asked to leave the organization. You've since had a child. You're kind, and you know, where are you at in life right now? How are you feeling?
Like it was brutal to have to let go of more than me and just like make peace with, you know, there wasn't anything, like I couldn't change. I felt like I fought as hard as I could to, like, I felt like I was fighting as hard as I could to not have this whole thing end, because I knew if I left, that the funding wouldn't be there. But at the same time, I was happy to see Liberians. I always dreamed that Liberians would run this organization. And that is what happened. Unfortunately, the funding isn't there the way that I wish that it was. And they are struggling to make ends meet. The school goes on. It's a lot less of a, you know, in a lot smaller capacity than it was. It was brutal to you know, I had to grieve the organization, letting that go, and grieve my sister's death. And it's been a few years now. Like my son's about to turn 3 and I was pregnant for a year with him. So it's 4. I think it's been like 4.5 years, almost 5. It's, I'm working part-time. You know, I'm a mom working part-time in communications and marketing. It's definitely not I don't feel like I'm living my purpose every day in my work. And that can be torturous at times, because I'm like, what can I do with everything I learned and everything I experienced that can continue to contribute to society and a world outside of my family? But I find a lot of purpose, meaning, and love and joy with my family on a small level. And maybe that's okay for now. But I'm wondering and seeking, and part of the reason I said yes to this interview with you, other than the fact that, of course, I love you, we have a relationship, is I think in talking about this stuff and in maybe having some of these back and forth, I can figure out if there is, you know, some lessons learned or something that I can contribute in that way for a period of time before finding my, you know, whatever's next.
Yeah.
But I'm open and exploring. I want to do my own podcast called Invite Me to Dinner. So I had gone to South America and had some conversations in Argentina and Chile. And then COVID hit and that kind of stopped, because I was going to travel the world and talk to and kind of do like a Humans of New York podcast type thing.
Yeah.
That never got edited. So that was one flop. And I feel like I've had a few of those where you're just like trying, and it is that there's an expectation that whatever you do is going to be amazing. And it's not. You're like a baby again, starting from scratch. It's very humbling, and I think it's a part of the human experience. And I also love life, and I'm thankful that I'm alive. I'm thankful that I had the experiences that I have. I have to live with some of this stuff that's not so great.
Sure.
But I also learn from it. And I'm just going to keep every day you wake up and you give life your best shot. So no, I'm not in the height of my career at the moment. I'm trying to figure it all out.
Well, I want to say to you, first of all, again, truly, sincerely, thank you for doing this. Also, if you need an editor, I know how to edit. So I'm happy to help you edit your podcast, because I've had to teach myself that for this thing. But you mentioned, in your own upbringing, on your own path, that you sort of never felt good enough, pretty enough, et cetera. And that was my journey too. I had, my own path that led me to be a very insecure, in need of validation person. And so I know what that's like. And I just want to say to you, and I know for me, this is almost impossible to hear. So I don't know where you're at with this, but if you can hear me in there, Katie Meyler, you should be proud of yourself for the work that you did. You should sincerely feel good about the fact that you put yourself out there, and that you tried to help people, and that you did help people. You helped a lot of people, and you helped me. You know, you help your passion. And that's, I want to say to those out there listening in the service industry, the way that this to me relates to you and everybody else. And the reason why it was important for me to have this thing is you got one life. And you're going to tell yourself that you're going to do things, and life is not easy, and doing those things are not easy. So you can get stuck in that. A lot of people in the service industry do. I have for many times in many places gotten stuck and not really been following what I knew in my heart I wanted to be following. And you did. You took what you wanted, Katie. You had a dream, you had a purpose, you did everything you could. You sold your eggs, you slept in my basement, which is insane. And you made that happen. And it wasn't easy. There were so many parts of it that weren't easy, and the end of it wasn't easy. But you did that, and you inspired people along the way. And everybody listening out there, you have that inside of you as well. We all do. You have to access it, you have to believe in it, and you have to show up every single day and do the thing that you know you want to be doing. And every day is not going to be easy. And there's going to be a lot of times when unexpected things are going to come and knock you on your ass, and that's life. But as long as you show up and you do the things and you care, that's all anybody can ask of you. And you did that, Katie, and you should be really proud of yourself. And I love you so much. And I'm happy for you that you've found, you know, you have family now. You're healing. You're finding out what your next step in life is. And I'm proud of you, Katie.
Hi, Katie. There goes my work. I gotta get on a work call.
All right. Okay.
I love you.
Okay.
Bye, Laurent.
Bye, Katie. Well, thank you everybody for listening. That was a hilarious way for that to end. And if you know Katie, you'll know that that's sort of par for the course. She's fun and crazy, and when she's got to go, she's got to go. But truly, I hope that you guys out there take away from this that what you're capable of if you really put your heart and your head into it. And also, you know, so much love for Katie. And she's been through a lot and got a lot of people throwing negativity at her and tearing her down. And she's still standing, and she's out there trying to live her life and put that incredible, inspiring heart and fire into something else. And I trust that she will, and I thank her for her time. Happy birthday to me. What a great present to be able to do this. And I couldn't have started my day any better. So lots of love to Katie, lots of love to everybody out there. Thank you for coming under. Thank you for taking a peek, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.